All right, everyone, welcome back to the Functional Retirement Podcast. I'm your host, Thatcher Taylor. I'm here with Thomas Elms, a certified financial planner that has a very specific niche about athletes, agents, entertainers. It's going to be extremely interesting. I'm so happy we got this going. Thanks for joining us, Thomas.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Thatcher. I'm super excited.
All right, so I found a fun fact about you. A simple Google search. I found a fun fact. So I'm a certified financial planner. You're a certified financial planner. And for anyone that doesn't know, it's a specific designation about the comprehensiveness of financial planning and building wealth. We have to meet very specific educational and testing requirements and ethical standards. But Thomas, you got yours a lot earlier than most people, literally most people. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, just kind of a crazy, I would say a whirlwind of events that built up to the start of my career in planning. I got the CFP at 23, which is kind of in like that top 1% as far as earliness from an age perspective of getting it. Normally, most people don't get it till 25, 30 plus. But was just really fortunate, to be honest. I grew up in a financial planning family. So father is in the business, been in the business, for the last, actually he had 33 years a couple of weeks ago. And I was just headstrong right when I got into college about getting into the industry and started an internship with the firm that I'm at now. And they were actually able to sponsor me for all of my series exams. So kind of the initial exams to get into the industry while I was in college. And then I went to a four-year university that had the CFP education track as a concentration, as a major. And so I was able to basically just walk out of college and take the exam. And through the internship experience that I had, I was able to kind of hit that experience requirement a lot quicker than most people. So it's definitely something that's fun to look back on. But it's allowed me to kind of take the younger aspect of my professional career and kind of put that out in front to show, hey, I might be young, but I've done the studying, I've done the research, I've passed the exams, and I know a little bit about what I'm talking about for sure.
Yeah, that experience puts you light years ahead of most advisors. I mean, I've been in the industry for 15 years. I didn't even get my CFP till I was 32 or 33. Didn't even sniff or think much about it until then. But you getting on it so early is just so fascinating because that's what they're trying to do. I feel like a lot more is universities, they have the CFP type programs. When you get out, you get the internships, you get the time requirements in the industry, and then you just pass the test and you're off to the races. And it seems like you've gotten a pretty good start so far. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been crazy. It's been a great ride. I just hit 5 years on the 1st of June here. So it's been a heck of a ride. And, especially with the clients that I've been blessed to work with that we'll get to talk a little bit about today. Just super excited to see what the next, 5+ years has to do with it.
Yeah, that's great. And so you're in Kansas, right? So where did you go to college? Where did you have that CFP undergrad study program?
Yeah. So funny thing is, I went about as far away from Kansas as I possibly could have. Even though, honestly, one of the best CFP collegiate programs is Kansas State University, which is 2 hours from me. But I was actually a baseball player in college. So I went out to California, actually. I went to a school called Biola University. It's a small private Division II school. It's about 15 minutes from Cal State Fullerton, right in that Fullerton, Anaheim area, and did that there and already have my spot back in Kansas City at the firm that I work with now, and just kind of came back home and started working.
Okay, so this is perfect. So this leads in. You have the most interesting niche, and I think people's ears are going to perk up because we're going to start talking about, and we're not going to be able to name drop, but we're going to be able to talk about. You work with professional athletes, entertainers, agents. You think of the TV show Ballers on HBO, but it's real life. It's not The Rock and his shitty acting. Yeah, like we're going to get into some real details, and there's some specific planning things that we can go over with this type of clientele. So we've already talked about a couple before we hopped on, but one thing I want to ask you, and I like to ask about all the time, is the mentality. I think that athletes and entertainers, they have a different mentality than most retirement preparers. from what you've experienced, we'll get back into how you found these, but from what you've experienced, tell us a little bit about the mentality and how they view quote unquote retirement.
Great question. The way that they originally think about it, I would say kind of on their own thought process is most players, and we'll just talk to the players here to start. Most players think that they'll get into the professional league and they'll essentially just have a great, 10 plus year career. They'll make hundreds of millions of dollars. And then they'll basically just kind of have this endless bank that they'll never have to ever work again. And will just never even have to think about money or plan for anything. The reality is, and I've experienced this much more in the last 1 year than I probably want to, is how hard it actually is to stay there. And it's kind of that adage phrase of, it's hard to get there, but it's much harder to stay. And I think that is such a great viewpoint to understand as a professional athlete, because once you've been in it for 2 to 3 years, you start to recognize that it's definitely hard to get there. But once you're there, it's so much harder to stay. And that means staying healthy, staying on the field, playing well enough to continue. There's so many things that come into that aspect that play into the retirement conversation. Because the reality is, between all of the US sports out there, I mean, the average career is anywhere from 3 to 7 years. You have 3 to 7 years to make a lifetime of money, right? And you also need to not spend it at that point in time too, because the biggest thing that you normally have to work with on players is starting to get them to realize that just because they make all of this money doesn't mean they're going to keep all of it, right? We can talk through taxes and things of that nature, but B, kind of keeping their lifestyle, at bay as much as possible, because that's normally where a lot of those things start to creep in is, they start to get very, very notable. They're kind of in that celebrity status, and the lifestyle starts to just go through the roof, and kind of preventing that from happening to a degree is super important as well.
Yeah. So there are a couple pieces I want to take this. So for everyone that's listening, if you're not a professional athlete, it's okay. There's a lot of things that you can take away from this. What Thomas just mentioned, like one thing, watch your lifestyle, like watch your spending.
Oh yeah.
But the other thing we can take away from this is, just to reiterate about retirement, athletes have almost retirement and then another retirement. They retire from their sport for whatever reason that you mentioned. But now we're kind of potentially preparing for, like you said, the rest of life, which if they haven't accumulated enough money to take them through the rest of their life, they've had to have done something along the way to prepare maybe for their next retirement. Like you see a lot of professional athletes go to work for ESPN. They sit behind the desk, they do whatever. So there's a lot of elements of this. And I think the most interesting thing is there's statistics that fly around, but there's one that you can Google. 78% of professional athletes go broke in 3 years.
Yep.
So is that something that you've noticed as well? Is that something that you really start working with athletes behaviorally along the way? And there'll be a follow-up question to this here in just a second.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a piece where it really depends on the sport, but it also depends on the specific players, the specific athlete situation. And what I mean by that is, let's just take baseball for an example, because this is going to be the easiest to bring this picture to light. Is the unique thing about baseball is you can get drafted as a high school graduate or as somebody in college. And so those 3 to 4 years between a high schooler and a college person coming into professional baseball, your values, your life, your thought process, it's insane the leaps and bounds that are made between those points in time. And everybody can recognize and understand that, right? And so normally from a college player's perspective, it's normally a lot easier for us to start considering, hey, what is our thought process on career paths outside of sports, right? Because maybe they've done, 2, 3, 4 years of college. They've gotten to experience some of like the more collegiate level classes and conversations about maybe what they would want to do outside of sports. At the high school level, they were just really, really good at baseball, right? They've never really thought about anything past baseball because it's basically just all they've done up until this point. And so just kind of trying to find ways to meet them at the right points in time in their life to discuss those things. I think that's probably one of the trickiest parts, because at the same time, you also don't want to strike the conversation too late, because then they've gotten used to the lifestyle that they're in. That's definitely the biggest part. But what we found is normally once a player's been in professional sports for at least 2 to 3 years, they really start to recognize and understand just through their own life perspective, what actually might be interesting and what could they be passionate about after sports. It just kind of almost takes some time to be in the sport to realize what you want to do after it.
Yeah, that just sounds like normal life. I mean, because we think a lot of professionals, they're in their 20s.
Yeah.
If they make it 3 to 5 years out of college, or however they get their baseball players, they go straight from high school, maybe a couple of years of college, then they go. They're only like 25, 26, 27.
Yeah.
Besides sports, they haven't thought about anything else. They play the season, then they have the off season, they're training. If it's baseball, as an example, they're going to spring training, then they're starting the season. It goes all the way to October. They only got a couple months off. So they're not thinking of anything else. So I think it's good that you talk about what would you maybe want to do after this? And then there's obviously the jokes. So-and-so is an insurance agent, or so-and-so is a financial advisor. And so it kind of makes sense. But the reason I wanted to talk about that is the mentality. I have a preconceived notion because I used to play a lot of sports. I was an athlete. I played college sports. Athletes have a mentality. I think that there's just a little bit more ego and confidence. And I think when it comes to building wealth and money, and they have this money coming in, I feel like it's hard to keep them in line with a plan. Like they see other athletes investing in places and they want to invest there. They want to spend a little bit more money. They don't want a financial advisor telling them what to do and that they can't spend their hard-earned dollars. What's the mentality like? Like how difficult is it just keeping them on track, especially with the volatility in their contracts, the money that they have coming in, the taxes, all the other nonsense, just keeping their focus on their plan?
I think the reality, honestly, is not pitching the dream, but pitching the dream to a degree. It's starting to get them to realize from a planning perspective, hey, if we do this, this, and this every year with this much money, this is where you could be if we do this, right? Is pitching the dream retirement for them, but actually coming up with a step-by-step process of how to achieve that. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest differences as an advisor working with players is you are so much more hands-on. And I think it's primarily because they're younger and they weren't educated and taught a lot of these things. They haven't had enough time to actually do it themselves, but also because they've got so much going on. And, you did a really good job of kind of explaining what a year could look like for a player and just really touching on them as much as you possibly can. Because I'll tell you kind of a hypothetical example of, we can use baseball here of what a planning horizon looks like. Is normally what we're doing is January and February is all plan oriented towards the upcoming year. Right. So we're actually building out, hey, this is what your contract's going to be. This is what you're going to be getting paid every 2 weeks. This is where we're going to be moving money from a cash flow perspective. This is how we're going to be investing for the next year. Right. And then once that plan is in place, then obviously we're navigating the tax situation for that year by April. But they're in spring training already. Right. So they're kind of ghosts at that point in time. They're getting their body ready, getting ready for the season. And so you kind of have to have those things already pre-set up anyway. Then when the season actually starts, it's literally every 2 weeks for me that I'm touching base with players and we're acting on the plan that we put in place. Now, there's a lot of automation that's going on in the background for sure. But what I have found is talking with them for 5 to 10 minutes and being like, hey, you just got paid today. Let's take a look at this, this, and this. We're going to move money here, here, and here. And it starts to ingrain them into this process, because one of the things I do love about athletes is they're almost always on a very specific weight and training and nutritional program. And if they're at the pro level, they've followed it to a T, right? Because they're at the pro level, they're elite athletes. So trying to almost orient the planning side of this, almost like it's on the weight training, the nutritional, the lifting, on that type of a program where we're touching base frequently and we're following through on these things. I think that's the biggest key is really just kind of taking their hand and walking them through a lot of these things.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's kind of keep going down that route. One of the things we want to talk about was cash flow. We've talked a lot about athletes, but this could apply to entertainers as well. Tell us a little bit about the mentality of cash flow, because most clients that advisors have, they're most likely going to have some sort of W-2 income, consistent job. or like be a small business owner where they're going to have some sort of income coming in. It could fluctuate here and there. But athletes and entertainers are vastly different than what we see on a day-to-day. So tell us a little bit about some things on how they get paid that are very unique and interesting, just kind of blow our minds. And then tell us about the cash flow, how you start to work the financial planning process with their cash flow.
Yeah. So we'll go athletes first here. So every athlete outside of professional golfers are paid as W-2. I was actually talking with another advisor who works with athletes about this. And the idea of would it be better if they were paid as W-2 or 1099? That's definitely a good question. But at the same time, you miss out on a lot of the things that the organizations provide at a W-2 level, like for free travel and housing, lodging, when they're playing games. So that's definitely kind of a conversation. But all players outside of golf are going to be W-2. They're getting paid twice a month, just like everybody else. It's just the numbers are very large, right? The other thing that you have to take into consideration is any endorsement income, right? And that's normally the biggest part that we have to pay attention to, is because those guys don't necessarily know off the bat that, hey, this endorsement income's not getting no taxes being withheld on this, right? So we got to make sure that we're doing quarterly estimated tax payments on that. That's a process within itself, right? But from a cash flow perspective, what we really like to focus on is a couple of different avenues. So the first avenue is a portion of money is going to be going straight to their checking account, right? So it's just going to be money to cover any sort of rent, mortgages, whatever it may be. If they own, any sort of real estate, it's going to be to go and cover those things, and any sort of lifestyle expenses outside of that. The nice thing about athletes is in season, they're normally so busy, they're traveling so much that they don't live very big, right? Normally the big lifestyle is in the off season. So that makes life a lot easier. The second place that we're going is actually still in cash, and it's what I call an off-season fund. So one of the unique things about players is they're only paid while they're playing, right? So if we talk about, kind of on the football side, right? So they're not playing right now. So they're also not getting paid right now as well. So one of the things that we're doing is every time a player gets paid, a portion of money is going in cash into a savings account to cover their 6 to 7 months of off-season expenses. Because what I see a lot is people won't plan for that on the player side, and then they've got to start pulling from investment accounts to cover their off-season expenses, and that's just not a good game long term, because it starts to get them familiar and okay with pulling money out of investment accounts whenever they see fit. So it's normally just a great place to kind of stash cash and have that off-season covered and paid for essentially before the off season even starts. So that's definitely a bucket. And then the next bucket is on the investing side. So the way that I look at it is 3 different accounts that we tend to fill for athletes is we segment it based off of years of retirement expenses. So we've got years 1 through 5, years 6 through 10, and then years 10 plus. And that's all non-qualified accounts. So one of the things that is most different about players from a planning perspective is we're actually putting a lot more money into non-qualified accounts, because if you put it in a retirement account and pull it out, if a guy retires at 32, you're getting ordinary income tax and a 10% penalty every time you do. So there's definitely, we still utilize the 401ks, the Roth IRAs, things of that nature. But the reality is a lot of these guys need to have money in non-qualified accounts to actually cover the retirement expenses that they'll incur because they're retiring at such a younger age.
There's so many things that I want to ask. There's so many things. That was awesome. So let's first clear a couple things up with everyone.
Yeah.
The endorsement income, that's most likely going to be 1099. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And so for everyone listening, you may already know this, but W-2 and 1099 are different in the sense that W-2 is going to go directly on your 1040 and there's going to be withholding. So when an athlete has withholding, tell me this, I don't even know this. I haven't even thought about this. Are there 401ks provided by professional organizations, by like the teams?
So the 401ks are provided by the actual sports league. So like for baseball, from a perspective, theirs is at Vanguard. And theirs is the MLB baseball players 401k. And they actually have a very unique 401k. So I can talk about this a little bit.
Hang on. Don't go there yet. Not yet.
Yeah, we'll go to the next. Okay.
But see right there, I didn't even know that. So the league provides the 401k, and you might get into this in a second, maybe something to think about. We can table this, but does it have like the same, I imagine it does. It's a 401k, the same contribution limits, the same rules in general as a traditional 401k that you see at work?
I'll say yes and no to that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second.
Okay, that's cool. And then so going along those lines, the W-2 is the regular income. They're going to contribute most likely to the 401k. If they sign up for it, it's at Vanguard, so they're going to have Vanguard funds. But the 1099 is basically self-employment income.
Yep.
So it's going to go on your Schedule C. You can look on the Schedule C at the potential deductions and withdrawals, and then that passes over to your 1040. So you got to manage both of those a little bit differently, or look at them a little bit differently. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things that I've noticed, especially on the baseball side, not as much on the other sports, but baseball normally over withholds on their W-2. So there's normally a little bit of grace there. And we're talking just like the general contracts, the signing bonuses are a little bit different. But you definitely want to make sure that you're keeping track of that and making quarterly estimated payments, because you don't want to get hit with that under withholding penalty. It just sucks you suck to see it. It's extra money coming out of your pocket when you could have just paid it on time. And it's probably one of the things that once a player gets to the legitimate professional level, and what I mean by that is, if you're talking baseball, there's minor league teams, so that's still minor league baseball, and they're getting paid next to nothing doing that. But once you get up to that professional level, basketball is a huge one. Football is a huge one. The endorsement contracts on average are a lot more profitable on those sports than necessarily baseball. And so making sure that you're not only making the quarterly withholding payments, but also finding ways on the tax code to reduce that overall income. There's a lot of good strategies there too.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let me ask, the reason I like what you just mentioned was I was thinking 1099 and taxes. Some of these endorsement deals could be very big, and you may have required quarterly holdings. And the thing that initially just popped in my head is, I don't know if anyone saw it, but Bill Romanowski just got in trouble. He's got to pay millions of dollars in back taxes.
Yep.
For whatever reason, he was trying to funnel his lifestyle payments through his business. So we'll get to the investment portion here in just a second, but I feel like taxes and professional athletes can be very, very tricky, and you got to be on it or you're going to get caught later down the road, and it's going to be a problem.
Absolutely. And one of the things too that I see is both the hardest but also most important thing to do with people in this area, because they typically tend to have a little bit larger egos, is you cannot be a yes person. You cannot be a yes person, because what I have seen, and you can read through all the tea leaves of the athletes that have gotten in trouble, or the advisors and accountants that have gotten in trouble, is they turn into yes people and they start trying to skirt the system to continue that relationship. And the reality is it's just always going to come back to bite you.
It does. And it did for Romo. This was almost 20 years ago. This was from like the late 90s to 2007. And he's getting in trouble for it or having to pay up now. And the
reality is
the interest that accrues, it's a disaster.
You're a household name now. And so the IRS is going to pay more attention to you because of that. That's just for good, bad, either. You're going to get paid more attention to. And so making sure that you're keeping an eye and keeping track on those things, and also just you have the right team in place that people know how to navigate those things correctly. Because here's another interesting tax conversation with athletes is they pay state income tax in every single state that they play in, right? It's a very unique thing to have to deal with, and you need people that are in the tax profession that know how to navigate and file returns, because baseball is the worst. We have players that file in anywhere from 22 to 25 states a year. And you have to be so specific on the number of days that you're actually in that city while you're playing to make sure that you're calculating the right rate of taxable income in that specific state. And also navigating, hey, this state doesn't have, state income tax. This one does. And if you're injured and you're not actually actively playing for the team, you're getting taxed in the state that you reside in, right? And so recognizing the opportunities and strategies for that, if you are injured, being in a resident state that does not have state income tax is also super helpful. Yeah,
that's awesome. So just kind of for my own information, just kind of interesting. So when you say the 401k is through the leagues, when players get paid, is it the league that pays them, or is that the team that pays them?
So it's still the team, right? Because And like a quick way that I would kind of do it is like a federal and state level, right? It's like the federal is the umbrella, right? But the states are normally doing certain things as well. So they're getting paid by the team. The 401k is interesting because they do have the same limits on, like pre-tax and Roth contributions, right? That, up to this year, they can do up to 22,500. But one of the nice things too, and this is some plans, but not all, is they also have after-tax contribution options, which allows for the mega backdoor Roth. But one of the most unique things is the league match. And this is the current year. Some of these things will switch as collective bargaining agreements change. But what's happening on the baseball side in particular this year is every 43 days that a player is actively on a major league roster, the MLB is depositing $10,000 into that player's 401k as a match. So they're going to, and 43 days of service is 1 quarter throughout an entire season of baseball. So they'll get up to $40,000 in employer 401k contributions if they're on a major league roster for that long.
That's awesome. That's really interesting. And so
getting a $40,000 match.
That's like the best match I've ever heard in my entire life.
Yeah, it's incredible. And most of the other leagues have similar but not as good matches. And we can talk pensions later too. Baseball by far has the best pension as well.
That's awesome. This is the perfect segue into the next portion of the investment conversation, which is really interesting to me. And I have a preconceived notion that we're going to dispel really quickly. But before we get into the investment portion, how did you get into this? We kind of glazed over that. We just dove right. How did you get into being able to work with athletes and like entertainers and their agents and this whole niche, this whole industry?
Yeah, honestly, just playing baseball. It sounds crazy, but playing baseball, being around the right players, and just really building relationships. The first actual client I've ever had as a financial advisor is a player that's currently playing right now. And I was basically able to take him on and then just branch out from there, because once you get a couple, you normally start to get to kind of be in those circles and hang out with more and more players. People start to know your name more and more, and then you just continue to build that out as it goes. But that was really kind of my end was that one specific player. He's been my best friend for a long time. And then I've been able to interact with his agent, other agents, and so that's how I kind of got into that realm. And on the entertainer side, kind of just casual, random networking acquaintances kind of got me into that perspective as well.
That's awesome, man. That's so cool. I have one ex-professional athlete client, and it was a teammate that I played with in college.
Yep.
So I could see how that could really blossom into something else. But that's really cool. So let's go into the investment portion. I've thought about this a lot, and I think a lot of people are going to think along these same lines of people think because Shaq is on television all the time talking about the investment portion, where Shaq's name is on everything. Yep. He's buying businesses all over the place. He's investing in businesses all the time. How often are professional athletes doing the tried and true Vanguard index funds, mutual funds, versus like the actual large business or small business investment where they're like partners or starting some sort of business with their name attached to it?
I would say you'd be surprised at how many there are. I would say the vast majority are doing that. And I'll tell you, just for the players that we work with, we actually, and I kind of mentioned this, the 1 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, and the 10+ year accounts, we don't even approach the conversation of buying businesses, franchises, looking at venture capital and private equity. We don't get there until the 10-year bucket is where we're at next. Right. So they need to fill the first 10 years of retirement expenses before we actually get to that conversation. I would assume and probably make a good educated guess that a lot of these guys are doing the exact same thing, because the reality is you don't want to count your eggs before they actually hatch. Right. You don't want to just go right into the super big, illiquid, hard to get your principal out investments unless you've got some cash and some liquid safety. I would also say that those private investments are starting to become a lot more popular. I would say for both good and bad. I think that there's a lot of benefit to it, but for every one deal that's good, there's 99 that were total failures. So talking through players and kind of showing them that that's the reality so that we can be a little bit more selective, because that's the issue with these players is they're getting deal flow. They're getting ideas thrown at them in their ear all the time. And so for me, I've kind of been able to be that no person for them, where be like, hey, I just got this deal. Can you review it? Let me know. And, I want to see what you think. I can kind of be that person to say no instead of them, which players have tended to appreciate, because they have a hard time saying no to that many people.
That's awesome too, because I feel like over time working with these players, they're looking for people that they can trust. They're
Yep.
looking for a backboard. And I think once they start to get to know that you care about them and their journey, and you have a system in place, you're thinking about retirement and the vision, you're putting all the elements in place, that I feel like at that point they can come to you with an offer. And in most cases, like a true-blooded young CFP like you that loves sports, I feel like you're going to give them genuine, real advice, as
Yep.
opposed to the horror stories of advisors that are milking them and bleeding them dry.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll just do case in point. Can I mention a specific stock on this and it be compliant? Is that possible?
I'm an RIA, bud. You can do
Okay.
just about
See,
anything you want.
hey,
SEC, don't listen. But yeah.
I'm not, so I got to kind of watch my tongue sometimes. But a case in point, I had a client that wanted to put a lot of money into the Rivian IPO. And a lot of yes person advisors would have wanted to satisfy that need. And I did a ton of research and I said, hey, I know the IPO seems super attractive, but let's take a beat and maybe give it 60 days. And I looked like an idiot for the first 3 days. I was getting text messages, kind of that passive aggressive, hey, it's at, this price now, we could have made some serious money. I sent him a screenshot of Rivian's price 2 weeks ago. And I said, hey, I just saw this, just thought I'd throw it your way. And he's like, dude, I'm really happy you said no to that one. But it's even just things like that, because these guys tend to be in a position where they can kind of go buy whatever they want. At least they think they can. And so if there's a hot idea out there, they think that it's worth it to throw a little money at it. And if you do that enough, it will eat at basically everything you've got. And so kind of being that person that provides a little bit of clarity and logic and just kind of sincerity. Hey, I think that we should just wait a little bit on this. I think it's proved pretty valuable so far.
Yeah, I love it. So we're gonna use a specific example because the NBA draft was last night.
Yep.
So we're gonna use an example, but first, I think I want to put a nail in the coffin about this. If any professional athletes are listening, that utilizing ETF, index funds, mutual funds, and a traditional investment approach built for long-term goals, regardless of you making big contracts, is an extremely valuable tool in your process to retire or develop a life after your initial retirement from professional sports. Could we agree on that?
Absolutely. It's the bedrock of what we do.
So absolutely. I just feel like people are trying to outthink the room. They get on social media. They're on social media a lot. They hear these people talking about things. They're getting attacked like a professional athlete's getting hit up from all angles at every networking event, every party they go to. I got an idea. Do this. Buy more real estate. Forget about that. Don't invest. That's the stock market's a scam. I can just see that happening in the real environment that we need to say, I mean, it's okay just to invest normally, for sure.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, so most of our guys have at least one rental property, and they span throughout the country. I do that for both the cash flow and the tax deductions that we can utilize for it. But I also do it to show them how much work actually needs to get put in and how much maintenance it requires to manage a single real estate property. Right? Because they're in a situation, they're not like you and me, where we just kind of have our Monday to Friday, right? We've got our weekends off, and our time is not as required as theirs is, and because what happens then is they've got to go hire other people and pay other people to manage those properties. Right? Now, that doesn't, go to say that there's not a place for it by any means. Because I love the benefits of that, but I think you're totally right. And it's kind of this thing where there's a lot of locker room talk. And it's kind of like, why aren't you doing this with your money? Like, I'm doing this. Why aren't you doing this? And it's kind of a battle of ego in some, phrases where I get that phone call. And it's like, hey, so-and-so is doing this. Have we thought about this? Should we do this? And it's like, hey, let's take a breather here. Let's get back to the basics, because they make enough money. If they just do it the right way, they don't really need to go and try and chase 20+% returns every year. They just need slow and steady and not to lose.
That's right. I could totally see it. I could see it in the locker room. There's some guy that did something great and they killed it with this particular thing. And it's just the same thing with us. Like what we say, all of these are professional athletes. The same thing we say to all of our own clients, like, just because your neighbor did this or your brother did this or a friend did this doesn't mean that it's good for you. And I think that same thing would be happening in the locker room, but intensified with veterans, rookies, younger players. I could totally see that, which leads into this first piece, this example. I think it's so good. Victor Wembanyama got drafted first last night in the NBA. He's going to make on his rookie contract $10 million. So let's say Victor comes in to your office by the good graces of whoever and is like, I want you to be my guy. So you know he's getting $10 million for but it's probably broken up. The contract probably structured over the course of a few years. A little bit here, a signing bonus, changes over time. How do you work with someone like Victor Wembanyama?
That is where we also have to take into consideration when and where he needs to be places. I would say that's also a hard part, is we've got to recognize when his time is actually available, right? Because for the next 2 weeks, he's going to be on nothing but a show-off campaign. And I'm not saying him showing himself off, but the team showing him off. He's got to do all these physical evaluations. There is a lot that goes into those first couple of days and weeks after the draft, especially if you're a first rounder. But after that's kind of all said and done, what we start walking through is, I would say, kind of like a baby step process, starting to educate them on, hey, we can't have $10 million in cash, even though he's not going to get that much because taxes is going to withhold, but we can't have this much in one account, right? So we need to start diversifying across different banks. So normally we're kind of starting that process of setting up multiple different bank accounts. And then that's when the planning process starts, where we're starting to allocate money into certain accounts. I normally, and this sounds kind of stingy, but I normally allow them one purchase. You can have one purchase. It cannot exceed 5 to 7% of your signing bonus.
Because, come on, man, I've seen the YouTube videos where they do rookies. How did you spend your first million?
Yeah. And what's funny is I've talked to so many players behind closed doors about those videos, and they freaking hate them. They hate them. And I don't know why, but it's just so funny because people just keep doing them. And I was even talking with a player about bringing him on my podcast, and he's like, as long as we don't do how I spent my first million, I'm okay with it, which it's interesting. But kind of back to the process is we're starting to build out places to start parking that cash. And then we're building out the team, right? So we're making sure that they're partnered up with an accountant. We're getting them partnered up with an insurance person. We're also getting them partnered up with an estate planner. Because the reality is most of these guys are anywhere from 18 to 22 years old when they get drafted. They're considered by law adults now, right? So having an estate plan in place, especially on the powers of attorney, is super important, because one of the things that you also need to start looking at is who starts coming out of the woodworks, right? What family, friends, old coaches, who's going to start coming out of the woodworks to try and get you to do certain things with your money, right? So we're kind of starting to establish a team that we can build around this player and their agent as well, so that we can put a good plan in place.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that structure. And I love how you mentioned the family dynamic. I feel like a lot of these players may be having their parents come in and be involved in this process quite a bit.
Or their parent's advisor, which is normally a bad route.
I was going to say that. The parent advisor that kind of struck gold with this kid becoming famous and being an athlete that's going to start raking, but the parent thinks they know best, when in all actuality, they may not know best.
Yeah, and the hard part is, and I'm actually experiencing this with a potential prospective client right now, is, and I feel so bad that all of this happens, but I understand why, is leading up to drafts, these players get outreach from so many advisors that a lot of them, what they'll do is they'll just shut the whole process down. They're like, we're not talking to anybody. And what happens there is it causes stagnation, which then leads to them not doing anything, right? And they're not actively planning, they're not working with somebody, and that creates an opening for them to either make a mistake or get taken advantage of by somebody that's close to them.
Yeah, I can totally see that. You hear those types of horror stories too. The parents, I have two kids. I can see myself already kind of, what if my kid made it big in sports? How would I play into that role? Do I feel like I deserve something, or do I just let them have it all? I think I just, you let them have it all. But I feel like there's some parents that believe they deserve something. They wouldn't be where they were without them, so their parents deserve something. Do you ever run into that at all?
Yeah, 100%. And I even would say on the flip side of that is the players feel like the parents deserve it, and so they'll start giving money rapidly. And then once that happens, you start to create this unending stream where money is just continuously flowing. And, dad wants to start a business, or cousin Ricky has this restaurant investment, or, whatever it may be. Normally we like to put about a 1 year pause on any sort of big gifts. Now, if you want to, drop 5,000 on a family vacation in the off season to just really kind of relax and de-stress and take the family on a much needed vacation, absolutely. And another thing is, the reality is sports is an out for a lot of people outside of a low income situation or an impoverished situation. And so, that from an emotional perspective plays a huge role in a player's mind as well.
And that's exactly what you just said is exactly where I was going with that. Is you can see with the family dynamic with a lot of these athletes and players, how they start to do what they do in their careers, where they push past or through injuries, or they feel the stress, or they're overwhelmed because if they're paying out too much money to other people, they need to continue to generate more money. They're pushing the envelope. They're taking bad contracts. They're doing weird things where people, when we watch ESPN, we're like, why would they do that? The money's gone. And so they're not enjoying it. So they're becoming more stressed. They're doing crazier things. They're pushing through injuries. Like, I can just see how the dynamic, the emotion can really build and overwhelm athletes as they go through this process.
Yeah. And, on the entertainer side, to kind of touch on that too, where I'm at right now is working with some influencers, both on the TikTok, Instagram side, but also on the Twitch side. And that is kind of a sudden wealth in itself too, because a lot of these people went viral and just kind of took it from there. And so recognizing that it is much harder to make anywhere near as much money in the influencer entertainer space as athletes, but B, the career trajectory is also a lot shorter as well. I mean, it is very, very hard. There's very few influencers that are in the space making the money that you probably think that they're making for over 3 years. And 3 years is pushing it. I mean, it's tough. I mean, obviously, like, you've got your Logan Pauls, you've got, whoever that have really kind of built a great regime around them where they can continue to be successful. But a lot of these people are 1 to 3 years where they've got the spotlight and they can make the money. And it makes it tough.
I didn't think about that. You would think initially, like right off the bat, you're like, oh, social media stars, they're going to be able to rake for years. They could do this forever, and they could take their following and they could position into something completely different and generate revenue a different way. But you're saying it's shorter. It's harder to get that long-lasting revenue in the social media space.
And I would say you talked about kind of shifting positions. I think that right there is the determinant is, as you make that first shift, because normally what happens is you go viral for one specific kind of thing, and then you just take that to the nth degree, which I'm not knocking by any means. But once you try and shift to something else, keeping the follower base that you built off of what you did initially, that's normally the hardest part. If you can transition to something else and then continue your fan base and continue to grow it, normally that's a great recipe to show that you'll be able to last for longer. But normally it's just somebody got hot doing some specific thing and they try to transition and they can't keep that follower base.
I could totally see that. Especially, you could see that. You can envision people that you saw like in 2020 during COVID, people burst onto the scene, but you don't see them as much now. It's 2023. That heat, that interest is now gone. Staying relevant, I could see is very difficult. I already have an idea. We're going to table the like movie star clients, the entertainer clients, the social media. We're going to do part 2 because I've got other questions for the athletes and we're already kind of bumping up the time. We're going to have you back for part 2 because that's just as interesting. And there's a whole other host of questions. We can reiterate some stuff, but we're coming back for part 2.
Sounds good.
So I want to ask about this. We kind of talked about taxes. We talked about the retirement conversation, but there's 2 things I specifically want to talk about before we leave. I want to talk about insurance and I want to talk about NIL deals.
Okay.
So the NIL just came out. For people that don't know, it's basically athletes now in college have the ability to be their own bosses now. They can make some money.
Yep.
Whereas before you couldn't. When I was in college and when you were in college, when we were playing for the NCAA, you couldn't do anything else really. There was nothing else. But now you can profit off your likeness. Tell me a little bit about what you've seen in the NIL space. And I know we could go into depth about this for like an hour, but tell me what you're seeing, how you get a hold of athletes, what you're seeing from college athletes making money, that type of stuff.
Yeah. The athlete world in general is very hard to break into. But I will tell you that the college athlete is even harder. And the reason why is because of the collectives at each specific university. And what I was just talking with another advisor a couple of weeks ago about this, because this is a road that he's going down, is the colleges are starting to insulate themselves and their players pretty heavily right now. And what I mean by that is they're building out these collectives where it's essentially the university's employees and staff that they're hiring to run and manage the NIL process. It's making it much harder for people like myself to actually get a hold of and to work with these people. So normally if we were to engage with a collegiate level athlete making NIL money, which I'm in the process of kind of working through that with a specific player on the football side right now, you've got to have some sort of in outside of the university. And the reality is some of this stuff is becoming so mainstream that advisors are really starting to try to go after these guys. It's ludicrous, some of the money that I'm seeing thrown around. I'm seeing $250,000 a quarter for some football players. I'm seeing more than that.
From where? Who pays that? Like from some car dealership or something?
So there's kind of 2 different pieces. So there's a collective provided by the university and their donors. And there's also outside contracts that are provided by these different organizations, right? So that could be like your Ford dealership, or it could be, whoever it may be. It even could be Nike. But those are some of the numbers that are coming around. One of the nice things that I like about it is players that probably wouldn't get paid, maybe kind of lower level on the totem pole players, or even lower level schools are able to utilize the collectives through donors to provide for those types of things. But it's gotten very tough. The big thing for them is all of that money is 1099. So if it were a perfect world, I think it would make it a lot, well, I wouldn't call it perfect, but it would make it easier on the players if it was W-2 income. But at the same time, there's so many tax strategies that you can deploy with 1099 income for these players that you could benefit from not having it that way. That is my biggest worry. Is I feel like a ton of college players that have made good money are going to get audited and are going to owe back taxes, owe under withholding penalties, because they're insulated by their university and they're not working with the right people.
Yeah, I agree. I think the best word is they are very insulated. They're still kind of under their parents' thumb. They got the coaches, the coaching staff, the NIL, and it is very complex. These are very treacherous waters that you can wade through perfectly fine. But if you don't do it properly, like you get all that money, you spend it. In full disclosure, when I first started in this business, I got a 1099 for like $60,000. I didn't pay any of my taxes. I didn't do anything with it. I was a young idiot. That was well over a decade ago. And then I had to pay the taxes on a payment plan. But I can totally see how a young kid with uneducated parents and not around the right people could get tens of thousands of dollars, not pay any taxes, and then all of a sudden they get a fat tax bill. And if they do that over subsequent years, they could be in big trouble for sure.
100%.
So Let's talk about insurance. Going back to our Victor Wembanyama, I couldn't help but think about this the whole time. He's 7'5". His biggest attributes is obviously his body, his footwork, his knees, his hips, his back. How much do you talk about insurance? Obviously, just general insurance, life insurance, disability insurance, long-term care, but also insuring specific body parts. Like David Beckham has the age-old story. He insured his legs for like $70 million. Tell us a little bit about how you approach that, because he's obviously a different clientele.
Yeah, and normally you don't get there until you're entering into like the contract level phases. But at the same time, you do want to prepare before then, because there's also loss of value insurance as well. So you see a lot of this on the basketball and the football side within the first 20 to 25 picks is you can purchase loss of value insurance while you're still in college. And if you incur an injury that prevents you from either getting drafted or not at what your slot value was, so where you were supposed to get drafted, that insurance claim can pay out. But on the specific pieces, from a body part perspective, like, knees are big on the basketball side. Arms are big for pitchers on the baseball side. Arms are also big for quarterbacks on the football side. I would venture to guess that Tiger Woods probably had a pretty major policy on his back. A lot of those things on the golf side, your back is normally pretty heavy there just because you're rotating so much. But honestly, we don't start to approach those until major contract years, because the loss of income is the conversation there. And on the baseball side, a lot of money is already guaranteed, so the insurance there isn't necessarily as important. Where we go is normally a lot of high limit disability policies for contracts that aren't guaranteed. What we also really pay attention to is home, auto, and umbrella, because a lot of these guys have super nice cars and very nice houses. And they are very exposed if they're underinsured to any sort of lawsuits, things of that nature. Because, if we're to just talk realistically here, if you're, hanging out with some friends and you drive home from a restaurant and you get hit by Odell Beckham Jr., that guy's got a lot of money in his pocket, right? So if you can sue him to get money, there's a lot of people out there that are looking to do certain things like that. So making sure that everybody's got adequate coverage is super important, because I'll tell you, I've worked with insurance agents on this, and they've told me stories at length. There's so many players that almost have state minimum coverage on their cars, which, if you've got, a G-Wagon and you've got state minimum insurance, that's some really exposed risk right there. And so just making sure that everything is at the top level that it can be at is super important. Normally, it's a tough conversation to broach with an athlete, because they're like, I'm indestructible, right? Why would I even need to worry about that? Normally, they have to go through something to experience the value in it. But my goal is to try and get them on board before something like that happens.
Yeah, the umbrella is a great way to go. Absolutely. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's required for most people. An umbrella is required, but for professional athletes, for sure. Even like, what if they threw a party at their house and someone did something crazy? They could get sued. That umbrella will help like protect them in so many different instances. Like you mentioned, the car wreck. I mean, that's a perfect example.
Yeah. Well, and being they're also super exposed out in the general public too, because everybody knows who they are. And you've got that one person that's had too many drinks and they want to go and try and fight somebody. That's exposure to a lawsuit there as well. And so just kind of having that ultimate security blanket behind you from an insurance perspective, it makes life just a whole heck of a lot easier.
Yeah. Hey, if you're listening, you're not a professional athlete, still check in to get in an umbrella. I got that directly from an attorney friend of mine. Get the umbrella. He'd seen some crazy litigation about car accidents and people getting sued. The coverage wasn't enough in the insurance plan. They come after your personal assets. The umbrella is really helpful. The Tiger Woods thing really stuck out to me. Tiger Woods is an example of the planning portion of this, why getting in front of you is really important, because the Tiger Woods example would be really valuable if Tiger Woods got that insurance policy in like his 20s. But once he started to have back problems and fusions in like his 30s and early 40s, that insurance policy wouldn't be as valuable or as helpful. Or he might not have been able to get underwritten for it because of his back problems. Or if he did, he'd get a gigantic premium. So getting out ahead of this stuff early is what really adds the value later in the event that it happens.
Yeah. And it's honestly, partly a battle just to find the right insurance groups that have the ability to write these types of policies too. Because just the honest reality is, if you talk about any sort of major professional athlete that you see on television every day, they're going to have a 10, 15, $20 million home, right? You can't go to State Farm and just get a policy from your local agent for that, right? That's going to be comprehensive enough. So you need to actually find the right companies, the right carriers, and the right groups to help structure and create the right products and policies for that specific player that will actually meet their needs. It's a lot harder than you think.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk a little bit about life insurance really quickly. We're getting close to the end here, but talk about how you view life insurance. So we try to view, everyone's got a little bit different of a life insurance calculation, the amount of assets, the amount of income we need to replace for a certain amount of years. Because contracts can be so different and the length of time actually in the career in a professional sport could be so different. How do you approach getting life insurance for these clients? Because they may have big premiums later for such a big policy, but they may not be working anymore. So how do you really develop the life insurance strategy for these individuals?
Yeah, so kind of the base start where we go is we actually like to look at kind of laddering in, and laddering is kind of a useful term here, but we ladder in on like 10-year term policies, because that allows us, when they're so young and so healthy, to buy super high value 10-year term policies that will be that kind of income replacement as they continue to work, continue to earn, and continue to invest. And then once we've built up a good nest egg, if we believe that permanent is a way to go, then we'll definitely start to have that conversation. But that's normally where they've built up enough money where they feel comfortable. And, we're kind of looking at it as like a secondary cash value buildup. There's also places at that stage where you can consider private placement life insurance as well. There's some opportunities where you can kind of leverage the cash value there for private equity deals, things of that nature. But we're kind of more of a term-based, shorter 10 to maybe 15-year term horizon there. And then we'll purchase the permanent policies in a phase where they're in like a major contract phase where they've really signed for good money. And we've got enough cash flow to correctly fund and strategize a permanent life insurance policy without also triggering any sort of, modified endowment contract situations where the policy lapses.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially with most of these athletes, even when they retire, say they retired around, even if they made it 10 years, like to 35 or 33, they're still very young. And as long as they're healthy, because each life insurance has to get underwritten, they still could get a pretty good policy at that age, even when they retire the initial time, I feel like.
Yeah, 100%. Because if they retire at 32, they're still younger than most people that even get life insurance policies. Right. And they're in professional level shape.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we've gone almost an hour. That was extremely valuable. The last thing I like to do, and I put you on the spot, and it can be athlete related. It can be professional athlete related or not. But from your experience, give us 5 things that you think are non-negotiable things that people need to do in their life. I imagine this will filter into non-athletes, but just give us 5 things, 5 must-dos. They can be monetary or non-monetary, just 5 things. Ready, go.
Okay, number 1, have some cash stashed away, man. And you see it emphasized. I see the impact of it more on the athlete side just because more money is coming in and out of the door, but have some cash stashed away. I think that we've approached a generation, or at least a current thought process where cash is just worthless. Man, can having some cash in an unopportune time be helpful? I would say that. Make sure that you're not outliving your income potential. And what I mean by that is lifestyle inflation. That's the biggest thing that I see with athletes and entertainers. It's also the biggest thing that I see with really anybody, is they just continue to inflate their lifestyles as their income goes up, but they don't increase their investment at the same time. Take care of your health. That's one that I know you're huge on. It's something that I'm really starting to get back onto. I was kind of the college athlete, hung up the cleats, stopped working out. I'm in a position now where I'm kind of getting back into that realm because I'm recognizing how important it is. Make sure that you're taking time to enjoy yourself as well. This is one of the things that I try and preach with players and athletes, is kind of prioritize experiences over things, because they can get very material very quickly. I think that goes the same with anybody that's kind of more normal, like you or myself, is, take that vacation, go do that experience with your friends or family. Where I'm at, that's 3.
No,
What
that's
else?
4. That's
Oh,
one
4.
more.
Okay. So only one more. Geez, you're making it easy on me. Work with a financial advisor.
Love it.
I love that one.
Yeah, you're not the first person to say that on here. So I think that's great. So have cash, don't outlive your income, take care of your health. Yeah, I'm a big one on that one. It's kind of the one value add that I have outside of just the traditional. I'm addicted to that. Enjoy your life. I agree. Life's too short. Anything can happen any day. Try to enjoy as much as you can, and then work with a financial advisor. Just get someone else to double check your work, get you on the right path. So this was great. I genuinely appreciate you coming on such short notice, and we already agreed to do part 2. We're going to dive into entertainers and the life of entertainers. So we'll record that here in the next couple of weeks and get that out. Tell everyone where they can find you, Thomas.
Yeah. LinkedIn, Thomas Elms, Twitter, Thomas Elms. I've also got an Instagram, Thomas Elms, as well. And then if you want to check out our website, it's personalfinancialgroup.com.
And then YouTube, right?
Yeah, YouTube as well. So we've got our podcast. It's called Fresh Finance. Feel free and type that into YouTube. You can see that there, as well as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you want to take a look at that as well. We're definitely going to have Thatcher on there soon.
I'll hit all these links below. So if anybody wants to check them out on their preferred platform, that'll be great. I can't wait to come on. Thomas, this was awesome, man. This was really interesting. Thanks for doing it.
Yeah, of course, man. Appreciate your time. And I'm looking forward to episode 2 for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
All right. Thank you.